the hills above Los Angeles, where the streets wind like sleepy snakes through quiet neighborhoods, there's a house that doesn't look like much from the outside. No giant gates, no flashy lights, no security cameras staring down like angry eyes. Just a modest home tucked behind some tall hedges and an old wooden fence that's seen better days. Most people driving by wouldn't even notice it. But if they knew who lived there, they might slow down, crane their necks, and whisper something like, "Wait. Is that him?" It was. Keanu Reeves had lived in that house for more than 20 years. Through blockbuster movies, world tours, magazine covers, and the kind of fame that usually pushes people into gated mansions with private armies, he stayed put. He liked the quiet, liked knowing his neighbors by name, liked walking his dog without a swarm of phones pointing at him. And yeah, he had a backyard pool. Nothing fancy, just a clean blue rectangle of water surrounded by smooth stone and a few lounge chairs. It wasn't a party palace. It was a place to cool off after a long day, maybe read a book, maybe stare at the stars and think. But word travels fast in a city built on rumors. Somewhere along the line, a story started floating around among a group of local teenagers. Keanu never locks his gate. He doesn't care if people use his pool. No one knew where it came from. Maybe someone saw him wave at a neighbor's kid once and twisted it into permission. Maybe it was just wishful thinking from bored kids with too much summer and not enough to do. Either way, the idea stuck. And one warm Friday night in June, 3 of them decided to test it. They waited until well past midnight. The street was dark, the houses quiet. Crickets hummed. A distant siren wailed, then faded. They crept up the hill, hearts pounding not from fear, but from the thrill of doing something they absolutely shouldn't. The side gate, just as the rumor said, wasn't locked. It creaked open with a soft groan that made them freeze for a full 10 seconds listening. Nothing. No lights. No barking dogs. No angry shouts. They slipped inside. The backyard was even better than they'd imagined. The pool shimmered under the moonlight. The water still and inviting. One of them dove in without hesitation, the splash echoing like a secret being spilled. The others followed, laughing in hushed tones, tossing a deflated beach ball they found near the shed. They stayed for nearly an hour, swimming, floating, whispering jokes, feeling like they'd gotten away with something huge. When they left, they didn't clean up. A crumpled soda can rolled near the steps. A damp towel lay forgotten on a chair. Footprints, muddy from the grass, led right back to the gate, they told their friends. Not everyone, just a few they trusted. But a few quickly became a bunch. Within a week, it wasn't just 3 kids sneaking in, it was 6, sometimes 8. They started bringing snacks, cheap beer hidden in water bottles, Bluetooth speakers playing music so low it was more vibration than sound. They figured if they were quiet enough, no one would ever know. But someone did. Keanu noticed right away. Not because he was spying, he wasn't the type, but because he paid attention to his home. He saw the towel the next morning, found the soda can near the pool filter, noticed the wet patches on the stone that hadn't been there the night before. At first he thought maybe a neighbor's dog had wandered in, or a raccoon had knocked something over. But then he saw the footprints. Too big for an animal, too many for one person. He checked his security footage not because he was paranoid, but because he'd installed a basic system years ago after a package thief kept hitting his street. The black and white video didn't lie. Night after night, shadowy figures climbing over the low part of the fence, slipping through the gate, splashing around like they owned the place. They weren't violent. They weren't vandalizing anything yet, but they were in his private space, in the one place he went to escape the noise of the world. Most people in his position would have called the cops immediately, or hired private security, or posted a stern warning on social media. But Keanu wasn't most people. He'd spent decades dealing with fans, paparazzi, strangers asking for selfies at funerals, and through it all, he'd held on to a quiet belief. People are usually just trying to get by, even when they mess up. Maybe these kids didn't understand boundaries. Maybe they thought a celebrity's life was so big and flashy that a little trespassing wouldn't matter. He didn't excuse it, but he didn't assume malice either. So instead of reacting with anger, he waited, watched, tried to understand. He started coming home earlier some evenings, just to sit in the backyard with a cup of tea listening. He heard the distant laughter before he saw anyone, felt the vibrations of bass through the ground. Once he even saw a flashlight beam sweep across the far wall as someone tried to find the gate in the dark. Each time he stayed hidden, not out of fear but out of curiosity. Who were these kids? Where did they come from? Did they have homes of their own to go to? He asked around quietly, without naming names, to a few neighbors he trusted. One mentioned seeing groups of teens walking up the hill late at night. Another said their own pool had been borrowed a few times last summer, too. It wasn't personal, it seemed. Just kids looking for a place to be kids in a city where safe, free spaces to hang out were disappearing fast. Still, that didn't make it okay. His home was his sanctuary, and every time they came, they chipped away at that piece a little more. One morning, he found something worse, a broken tile near the pool edge. Not smashed, just cracked like someone had dragged something heavy across it. Then a torn inner tube floating in the water, and finally the kicker, a drone photo. Someone had posted a blurry nighttime shot online with the caption, "Chilling where Keanu chills and blessed." It didn't show faces, but it showed his backyard. His private space now public. That's when he knew he couldn't just wait anymore, but calling the police felt heavy. These weren't criminals. They were kids. Maybe foolish, maybe disrespectful, but still young enough to learn. He remembered being that age, feeling invisible, looking for connection, testing limits just to see what would happen. He didn't want to ruin their futures over a swim, so he made a decision. Next time they came, he wouldn't hide. He wouldn't yell. He'd meet them, face to face, not as a movie star, not as a victim, but as a person who lived there, who cared about his home, and who maybe, just maybe, could help them understand why that mattered. He didn't know if it would work, but he knew anger wouldn't fix anything. And if there was one thing Keanu Reeves had learned in a life full of loss, fame, and unexpected turns, it was this: kindness often goes further than force. He just hoped they'd be willing to listen. It happened on a Tuesday night, warm but not too hot. The kind of evening where the air feels soft and the stars seem close enough to touch. The group had grown a little since the first few times. Now there were 5 of them, buzzing with the kind of restless energy that only summer nights and too much free time can create. They'd brought snacks this time, chips in crinkly bags, sodas in cans they promised to take with them, though last time they hadn't. One even carried a small speaker, tucked under his jacket like contraband. They moved quietly up the hill, laughing in low voices, shushing each other when someone stepped on a dry twig. The gate was still unlocked. It always was. That fact alone made them feel like they'd been given silent permission, like the universe itself was winking at them. They slipped inside, the familiar scent of chlorine and night-blooming jasmine wrapping around them like a welcome. But something felt different. The backyard was lit, not brightly, just enough. A single lamp glowed near the patio table, casting a soft circle of light. And there, sitting in one of the lounge chairs, was a man. Not standing, not yelling, not holding a phone to call the cops. Just sitting, wearing a plain gray t-shirt and loose pants, barefoot, holding a bottle of water. He looked calm, almost like he'd been waiting. The kids froze. One of them took a step back, ready to bolt. Another whispered, "Is that?" but didn't finish the sentence. They all knew. Even in the dim light, there was no mistaking him. The way he held himself, still, quiet, present, was unmistakable. This wasn't some random homeowner. This was him. Keanu didn't stand up. He didn't glare. He just turned his head slowly and said, "Hey." His voice was gentle, not angry, not even disappointed, just there. The group stood awkwardly near the gate, caught between panic and disbelief. One kid clutched the speaker like a shield. Another stared at the ground, cheeks burning. No one spoke. After a few long seconds, Keanu set his water bottle down and gestured toward the empty chairs. "You don't have to run," he said. "Come on, sit." They exchanged glances. Was this a trick? Were cops hiding in the bushes? But he looked alone and honest. Slowly, hesitantly, they shuffled forward and sat on the edge of the nearest chairs, back stiff, eyes darting everywhere except at him. For a moment, no one said anything. Crickets filled the silence. Then Keanu leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and spoke again, quietly, like he was sharing something important, not scolding. "I get it," he said. "This place looks nice, quiet, feels like an escape." One of the kids finally mumbled, "We didn't think you'd mind." "I do mind," Keanu said gently. "Not because I'm mad at you, but because this is my home. When you come in without asking, it doesn't feel safe anymore. The words landed softly, but they hit hard. No shouting, no threats, just truth. Another kid swallowed. We cleaned up last time, mostly. Mostly isn't enough, Keanu replied. And even if you left it spotless, it's still not yours to use. You wouldn't walk into someone's kitchen and make yourself a sandwich without knocking, right? That got a small, nervous laugh. But it also made sense. He paused, then reached behind his chair and pulled out a cooler. From it, he took out 6 cold bottles of soda. Real ones, not energy drinks or sugary junk, and set them on the table. Here, he said, pushing them toward the group. You're already here. Might as well not be thirsty. They stared at the sodas like they were grenades. Finally, one reached out and took a bottle. Then another. Soon, all 5 had one in hand, still not sure what was happening. Keanu leaned back again. So tell me, why here? There's public pools, parks, beaches. Why sneak into a stranger's backyard? The question hung in the air. Then slowly the answers came. One said the public pool closed early and cost money they didn't have. Another admitted their apartment building didn't allow guests by the pool. A third just shrugged and said, it felt secret, like we were part of something. Keanu listened. Really listened. Nodding when they spoke, not interrupting, not judging. When they finished, he was quiet for a moment, looking out at the dark trees beyond the yard. I used to do dumb stuff when I was your age, he said finally. Not this exact thing, but stuff that felt exciting because it was off limits. I get the thrill. But there's a line between adventure and disrespect. And crossing into someone's private space, that's on the wrong side. He wasn't lecturing. He was sharing, like an older brother who'd been there. Then he surprised them again. What if, he said, turning to face them fully, instead of sneaking in here, you had a place that was actually yours? Somewhere you could hang out, swim, listen to music, no sneaking, no guilt? They blinked. Like, where? One asked. I don't know yet, Keanu admitted. But I've been thinking about it. There's an old community center down near Oak Street. It's mostly unused. Maybe it could be fixed up. Maybe I could help make that happen. Their eyes widened. You'd do that? I'd rather spend my time helping you have a real place than chasing you off my property, he said with a small smile. But there's one condition. They leaned in. You stay off my property. No more coming here. Not tonight, not next week, not ever, unless I invite you. Deal? They looked at each other. It wasn't a punishment. It was an offer. A chance. One by one, they nodded. Deal, the tallest one said. Keanu extended his hand. Not for a handshake, just an open palm like a promise. They each touched it lightly like sealing a pact. He didn't ask for names. Didn't take photos. Didn't make them sign anything. He just said, go home safe, and thanks for listening. They stood, still a little dazed, and walked back to the gate. This time, they closed it softly behind them. No laughter. No rushing. Just quiet footsteps fading into the night. Keanu stayed in his chair for a long time after they left. He didn't feel victorious. He felt hopeful. He knew kids would be kids, impulsive, curious, sometimes careless. But he also knew that most of them just wanted to belong, to have a space where they felt seen. If he could help create that, maybe this wouldn't happen again. Not just to him, but to anyone. Over the next few days, he made a few calls. Not to lawyers or security firms, but to people who ran youth programs, to city officials who handled community spaces, to a nonprofit that renovated old buildings for public use. He didn't want credit. He didn't want headlines. He just wanted to turn a problem into a possibility. Meanwhile, the teens kept their word. For 2 whole weeks, his backyard stayed quiet. No footprints, no trash, no drone shots. Just the sound of wind in the trees and the occasional splash from his own dog jumping in to cool off. He allowed himself to believe it was over. But then, on a Friday night, his phone buzzed with a notification from his security app. Motion detected, backyard. His heart sank. He pulled up the live feed. There they were, not the same 5, but a bigger group. At least 10 kids. Some he recognized, others he didn't. Music played from a speaker. Someone was doing cannonballs off the side. And this time they weren't being careful. A lounge chair was tipped over. A bottle shattered near the steps. Worse, he saw someone holding a phone up high, filming. The deal was broken, not by all of them, maybe, but by enough. Keanu sat back, disappointment heavy in his chest. He hadn't expected perfection, but he'd hoped for honesty. He'd offered them a way out, a real solution, and they'd chosen to go back to the easy, selfish option. He didn't call the police that night, but he did something else. He took screenshots, saved the video, not to shame them, but to understand who was involved. And more importantly, to figure out what came next, because kindness had been tried. Now it was time for something firmer, but still human. He knew yelling wouldn't fix it. Fear might stop them for a night, but not for good. What they needed wasn't punishment. They needed to understand the weight of what they'd done, not just to his property, but to the trust he'd offered. And if they couldn't learn that on their own, maybe they'd have to learn it by helping build something better. He turned off the feed, walked to the window, and looked out at the quiet street. The night was still beautiful, the stars still bright, but something had shifted. The gentle warning was over. Now came the lesson. The video spread faster than anyone expected. It wasn't on a major platform, just a quick clip posted to a group chat, then shared to a story, then reposted with a flashy caption, "Living like Keanu for a night. Pool vibes blessed." The footage was grainy, shot from a phone held high above the water, but you could clearly see the shape of the backyard. The same stone edge, the same diving board, the same quiet hillside in the background that fans had seen in old magazine photos. It didn't show faces well, but it didn't need to. The location was unmistakable. Within hours, comments poured in. Some were jokes. "Bro really out here swimming in Neo's tears." Others were more serious. "That's someone's home, not a hotel." But the damage was done. What had been a local secret was now public gossip. Strangers started driving by the house during the day, slowing down, snapping photos from the street. One even left a note on the gate asking for a quick dip. Keanu noticed the change right away. His morning walks felt different. More eyes on him, more whispers. Delivery drivers lingered longer than usual. Even the mail carrier gave him a knowing look. It wasn't hostility, but it was attention. And attention was the one thing he'd spent decades trying to avoid. But what hurt more than the stares was the betrayal. He hadn't just offered those kids a warning. He'd offered them a chance. A real one. He'd listened. He'd shared soda. He'd even started making calls about that community center, sketching out ideas in a notebook during quiet evenings. And now, not only had they broken their word, they'd turned his private space into content, something to be liked, shared, and forgotten. He sat at his kitchen table one morning, coffee cooling in his hand, watching the sun rise over the hills. He thought about calling the police, about installing motion sensor floodlights, about moving, but none of those felt right. Moving felt like surrender. Floodlights felt like turning his home into a fortress. And the police? Well, he didn't want kids getting records over a stupid mistake. But he also couldn't let it keep happening. So he made a different kind of call. Not to a lawyer, not to security, but to a friend who worked with the city's youth outreach program. They'd known each other for years, through charity events and quiet conversations at film festivals. Keanu explained what had happened, not with anger, but with concern. "It's not just about my pool," he said. "It's about respect. And it's about these kids not having anywhere else to go." His friend listened, then said something that stuck with him. "Sometimes, consequences teach better than kindness alone." That phrase turned over in Keanu's mind for days. He didn't want to punish, but maybe consequences didn't have to mean handcuffs or court dates. Maybe they could mean responsibility. Meanwhile, the trespassing didn't stop. A week after the video went up, another group showed up. Different faces, same behavior. They left behind a torn floaty, an empty energy drink can, and muddy handprints on the pool ladder. The next time, someone tried to climb the fence during daylight, thinking no one would be home. They were wrong. Keanu opened the back door just as they tumbled into the yard, wide-eyed and stammering excuses. He didn't yell. He just said, "This ends now," and called the non-emergency police line. Officers came, took statements, warned the teens, and left. No arrests, but a record was made. Still, the message wasn't sticking. What Keanu realized was this: these kids weren't acting out of malice. They were acting out of boredom, loneliness, and a lack of options. The city had shut down 2 teen centers in the past 5 years due to budget cuts. Parks closed at dusk. Libraries didn't allow loitering. For many of them, the only places left were fast food parking lots or someone else's backyard. He couldn't fix the whole system, But maybe he could fix one small piece of it. So he doubled down on his plan. He met with the city official in charge of unused public buildings. He toured the old Oak Street Community Center himself, peeling paint, flickering lights, a broken basketball hoop out back. It was sad but full of potential. He offered to fund the full renovation, on one condition. It had to include a supervised outdoor area with a small pool, open late in the summer, and run by local staff who actually cared about the kids. The city said yes, but Keanu knew that wasn't enough. He needed the very people who disrespected his space to understand why it mattered, and to help build something better. So he asked his friend at the outreach program to quietly identify the repeat offenders. Not to shame them, but to invite them. To give them a choice: face formal trespassing charges, or help build the new center. It wasn't punishment disguised as charity. It was accountability wrapped in opportunity. One afternoon, a few days later, 2 of the original 5 showed up at his gate, not to sneak in, but to talk. They looked nervous, standing there in the daylight, hands shoved in pockets. Keanu came out, still in his gardening gloves, dirt on his knees. "We saw the video," one said, voice low. "We didn't post it, but we were there that night." "We should have stopped it," the other added. "We're sorry. We really were going to stay away." But then everyone started talking about it, and it got out of hand. Keanu studied them. He saw regret in their eyes, not just fear of getting caught, but real shame. "That mattered. I believe you," he said, "and I've got a way you can make it right." He told them about the community center, about the offer, about how their help, sanding wood, painting walls, cleaning the yard, could turn a broken place into something useful for everyone. They exchanged glances. "You'd really let us help?" "Only if you're serious," he said. "It's work, not a party." They nodded fast. "We're serious." That was the first crack in the wall. Over the next week, more came forward, some on their own, others brought in by parents who'd heard rumors. Not all of them. A few still thought it was a joke or didn't care. But enough showed up at the outreach office to fill a small crew. Keanu didn't show up at the first meeting. He wanted this to be about them, not him. But he did send a note, handwritten, taped to a box of work gloves. "Thanks for choosing to do the right thing. This place will be yours too." The city assigned a supervisor, a former teacher who'd worked with at-risk youth for 20 years. She didn't treat them like troublemakers. She treated them like workers. Gave them tasks, checked their progress, even brought snacks. Slowly, something shifted. These kids who'd once seen his backyard as a playground now saw a blank wall they could paint, a broken bench they could rebuild, a space they could call their own, without sneaking. But Keanu knew the real test was coming. Because the ones who'd filmed the video, they hadn't shown up, and until they faced what they'd done, not just to his property, but to the trust he'd offered, the lesson wouldn't be complete. So he waited. Not with anger. Not with threats, but with quiet certainty that if you give people a chance to do better, some of them will surprise you. And if they don't, well, the law was still an option. But he hoped it wouldn't come to that, because deep down he still believed in second chances. He just knew they had to be earned. The meeting didn't happen in a courtroom. No stern judges, no flashing badges, no parents fidgeting in stiff chairs. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon in a small room at the back of the Oak Street Community Center, the very place that was slowly coming back to life thanks to paint cans, power drills, and the sweat of kids who'd once thought trespassing was harmless fun. Keanu hadn't planned to be there at first. He'd left it to the outreach team, trusting they'd handle things fairly. But when he heard that the 2 who'd posted the video still hadn't shown up, not for work, not for meetings, not even to apologize, he changed his mind. Not to confront them, but to close the loop. So he walked in quietly, wearing the same kind of plain clothes he always did: jeans, a soft cotton shirt, sneakers worn from use. No sunglasses, no entourage, just him. The room fell silent the moment he stepped through the door. A few of the kids who'd already been volunteering looked up from their sketchbooks and tool belts, surprised. The 2 who'd been avoiding everything sat near the back, eyes down, shoulders hunched like they were trying to disappear. He didn't sit at the head of the table. He pulled up a folding chair near the middle and sat down like he was just another person in the room. "I'm not here to yell," he said, voice calm, almost gentle. "I'm here because I made you an offer, and I want to know if you're going to take it." No one spoke at first. The air felt thick like before a summer storm. One of them finally looked up. "We didn't think it was a big deal," he mumbled. "It was just a video. We didn't show your face or anything." Keanu nodded slowly. "I know. And I believe you didn't mean to hurt me. But here's the thing. When you treat someone's home like a backdrop for content, it stops being just a place. It becomes something you use, and that takes away the safety of it." He paused, letting that sink in. "You ever have a spot that's just yours?" he asked. "Maybe a treehouse as a kid? A corner of your room where no one else goes? Imagine someone walking in there without asking, taking pictures, laughing like it's a joke. You wouldn't feel mad just because they messed up your stuff. You'd feel like your piece was stolen." The room stayed quiet. One of the girls who'd been painting murals on the center's walls spoke up softly. "We've been coming here every day this week. Sanding floors, cleaning windows. It's hard work, but it feels good, like we're making something real." Keanu turned to the two in the back. "That's what I'm offering you. Not punishment. A chance to build something better than what you broke." Then, he laid it out plainly. The city had agreed to drop formal trespassing charges for everyone if they completed 40 hours of volunteer work at the center. Not just showing up, but actually contributing, helping finish the outdoor area, setting up the pool safety equipment, even mentoring younger kids once the space opened. If they didn't, then the legal process would move forward. Not because he wanted it to, but because boundaries matter. "It's your choice," he said. "You can walk out that door and take your chances. Or you can stay, roll up your sleeves, and help turn this place into something your whole neighborhood can be proud of." For a long moment, no one moved. Then one of them stood up. Not to leave, but to walk over to the supply closet and grab a pair of work gloves hanging on a hook. He didn't say anything. He just slipped them on and stood beside the girl who'd been talking about the murals. The other one hesitated, then followed. That was it. No grand speech, no tears. Just two kids choosing to do the right thing. Maybe a little late, but not too late. Over the next few weeks, the transformation was slow but steady. The center began to hum with life. Old couches were reupholstered. Broken tiles in the courtyard were replaced. A shaded patio with picnic tables took shape where weeds had grown before. And in the back, a small shallow pool safe for teens, supervised by trained staff, was cleaned, tested, and filled with clear, cool water. The kids who'd once sneaked into Keanu's backyard now spent their afternoons there. Not swimming, but working. They learned how to mix concrete, how to hang drywall, how to test pool chemicals. One discovered he loved painting and started designing stencils for the walls. Another, quiet and observant, turned out to be great at organizing tools and keeping the supply shed in order. Keanu didn't show up every day, but he came by often, sometimes bringing lunch for the crew, sometimes just sitting on a bench watching them work. He never acted like their boss, more like a quiet supporter, someone who believed in them even when they didn't believe in themselves. One hot afternoon, as they were installing shade sails over the pool area, one of the teens finally asked the question that had been hanging in the air for weeks. "Why'd you do this?" he said, wiping sweat from his brow. "You could have just called the cops and been done with it. Why go through all this trouble for us?" Keanu looked out at the yard, the clean lines, the fresh paint, the sound of hammers and laughter mixing in the air. "Because I've been lucky," he said simply. "I've had people give me second chances when I didn't deserve them. And I've learned that most people aren't bad, they're just lost. If I can help someone find their way, even a little, that's worth more than being right." The teen nodded like he was storing those words somewhere safe. As the weeks passed, something else changed. The group started policing itself. When a couple of new kids showed up one day joking about finding Keanu's secret pool, the original crew shut it down fast. "That's not how it works here," one said firmly. "This place is real. You want to hang out? Earn it." Word spread, not through viral videos, but through respect. Parents started stopping by, thanking the team for giving their kids a purpose. Local businesses donated paint, snacks, even old furniture. A retired lifeguard volunteered to run swim safety workshops. The center wasn't just a building anymore. It was becoming a community. And through it all, Keanu stayed in the background. He never took credit, never posted about it online. To the outside world, it looked like just another city project. But to those who were there, they knew the truth. This place existed because one man chose understanding over anger. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Keanu stood alone in his own backyard. The pool was still. The gate was still unlocked, not because he didn't care, but because he no longer feared what might come through it. He'd made peace with the idea that kindness sometimes needs boundaries, and boundaries sometimes need help to be respected. But more than that, he felt something rare: hope. Because the kids who'd once trespassed weren't just staying away, they were building something better. And in doing so, they'd given him back his peace, and found a little of their own. He sat down on the edge of the pool, dipped his feet in the water, and smiled. The lesson hadn't been about punishment, it had been about connection. And that, he thought, was worth every drop of effort. Summer turned to fall, and the Oak Street Community Center officially opened its doors. There were no red carpets, no flashing cameras, no speeches from city officials trying to grab headlines. Just a simple ribbon cutting with a pair of garden shears, a few folding chairs set up on the newly paved courtyard, and a table piled high with homemade cookies and lemonade donated by neighbors. Kids from all over the neighborhood showed up, some curious, some shy, some already familiar with the space because they'd helped build it. The pool area, now complete with bright blue tiles, shaded seating, and clear safety rules posted on the fence, shimmered under the afternoon sun. A retired lifeguard stood by the edge, clipboard in hand, already running a beginner's swim clinic for younger kids. Inside, the game room buzzed with the sound of pool balls clacking and laughter from a group playing board games at a long wooden table someone had sanded and stained by hand. And in the middle of it all, quietly leaning against a wall near the entrance, was Keanu. He wasn't center stage. He wasn't even wearing anything special, just a faded t-shirt and jeans like any other visitor. But a few people recognized him. They didn't swarm or ask for photos. They just nodded, smiled, or said a quiet, "Thank you." He returned each gesture with the same calm warmth he always carried. What mattered most wasn't his presence, it was what had grown in his absence. The teens who'd once sneaked into his backyard were now regulars at the center, not as troublemakers but as mentors. One ran the weekly movie night in the lounge, carefully selecting films that sparked good conversations. Another helped organize a weekend art workshop, teaching younger kids how to sketch and paint. The one who'd posted the video? He'd become the unofficial tech guy, fixing the sound system, setting up the projector, even helping the center launch a simple website so families could sign up for programs. They weren't perfect. Some days they were late. Some days they argued, but they showed up, and they cared. Keanu watched from a distance as one of them patiently showed a group of 10-year-olds how to test the pool's pH levels. "You gotta keep it balanced," the teen explained, holding up a little vial of water. "Too high or too low and it's not safe. Just like life, I guess." Keanu almost smiled. That kid had come a long way. Back at his house, things had settled into a new kind of quiet. The gate was still unlocked, Keanu never changed that. But no one came through it uninvited anymore. Not because they were afraid, but because they finally understood what it meant to respect someone's space. Every now and then, one of the teens would walk past his street on the way home from the center and give a small wave. He'd wave back. That was enough. One evening, months after the center opened, a local newspaper published a short piece on the revival of Oak Street. It didn't mention Keanu by name. Instead, it quoted a few volunteers and highlighted how the space had become a safe haven for teens who previously had nowhere to go after school. At the very end, tucked between paragraphs about new programs and community donations, was a line that caught a few readers' attention. "Someone who believes in second chances made this possible." We won't forget that. No name, no photo. Just gratitude, plain and simple. Around the same time, a handwritten letter appeared in the suggestion box at the center. It was addressed to the person who gave us a chance, and it read, "We thought your pool was the prize." Turns out the real gift was learning that our time, our hands, and our choices actually matter. You didn't shame us. You trusted us to do better. So we did. Thank you for seeing us, not as trespassers, but as people worth believing in. The staff taped it to the bulletin board near the front desk. It stayed there for weeks, slowly curling at the edges from sun and handling, but never taken down. As the seasons changed again, the center kept growing. A local college student started a homework help program. A retired musician offered free guitar lessons on Thursday nights. Even the city took notice, approving funds to keep the lights on year-round. And through it all, Keanu remained in the background, checking in quietly, dropping off supplies, sometimes just sitting on a bench watching kids laugh and play like they belonged, because now they did. One cool spring morning, he walked his dog past the center on his way to the market. Through the open gate, he saw one of the original group teaching a younger kid how to hold a paintbrush properly. The teen was patient, calm, encouraging, everything he hadn't been that first night by the pool. Keanu paused for a moment, just watching. His dog tugged gently on the leash, ready to keep moving. He gave the center one last look, then turned and walked on. He didn't need thanks. He didn't need credit. What he'd wanted all along wasn't obedience or fear. It was understanding. And somehow, against the odds, that's exactly what had taken root. Back home, he made himself a cup of tea and sat by his pool. The water was still. The air was quiet. No footprints. No trash, no drones. Just peace. The kind that comes not from walls or locks, but from knowing you've done something that mattered. Later that week, he received a small package in the mail. No return address. Inside was a handmade ceramic tile, painted with a simple design. A pool, a fence, and two figures shaking hands under a starry sky. On the back, in careful handwriting, it said, "Built with respect." He placed it on his bookshelf, right next to a photo of his dog. Life went on. Movies were made. Interviews were given. The world kept spinning. But in one quiet corner of Los Angeles, something lasting had been built, not with concrete and steel, but with trust, time, and a little bit of grace. And every time someone asked Keanu about the story, about the kids, the pool, the center, he'd just shrug and say, "People are good. Sometimes they just need a place to prove it." He never told the full story, never made it about himself, because in the end, it wasn't. It was about second chances, about community, about how one act of quiet kindness, backed by firm boundaries, can ripple outward in ways no one expects. And in his backyard, under the same stars that had watched it all unfold, Keanu Reeves finally swam alone again, not because he was lonely, but because he'd given others a place to belong, and that, more than anything, was enough. There was no part 6 planned. The story as it stood felt complete. 5 quiet acts of understanding, consequence, and renewal, ending where it began, with peace in a backyard and purpose in a community. But life, as it often does, kept going, and sometimes the most meaningful endings aren't really endings at all. They're just new beginnings wearing old shoes. A year after the Oak Street Center opened, something unexpected happened. Not a crisis, not a scandal, just a slow, steady shift that no one saw coming until it was already real. The teens who'd once been the problem became the protectors. They didn't just show up for shifts. They started organizing events, recruiting friends, even pitching ideas to the city council about expanding hours and adding programs. One of them, the quiet one who'd been great with tools, enrolled in a trade school, inspired by the weeks spent fixing what was broken. Another began volunteering at a youth shelter downtown, saying, "If someone gave me a chance, I owe it to pass it on." Keanu watched all this from a distance, not as a savior, but as a witness. He still dropped by the center now and then, not to check up, but to connect. He'd sit on a bench near the courtyard, sipping coffee from a paper cup, listening to conversations drift by, kids debating movies, planning study groups, laughing over inside jokes born from long afternoons spent painting walls or hauling mulch. No one treated him like a celebrity. To them, he was just the guy who believed in them when no one else did. But the real surprise came on a rainy Tuesday in March. The city announced budget cuts. Not huge ones, but enough to threaten the center's weekend hours, the very time when most teens could actually use it. Staff would be reduced. The pool might close during summer afternoons. Panic rippled through the regulars. They'd worked too hard to let it slip away. Instead of waiting for someone else to fix it, they acted. They organized a fundraiser, not online, not with flashy ads, but the old-fashioned way. Bake sales at local churches, a car wash in the center's parking lot, a talent show in the lounge with acts ranging from spoken-word poetry to surprisingly good guitar solos. They made flyers by hand, posted them on bulletin boards, knocked on neighbors' doors, And quietly, without fanfare, they reached out to the one person they knew might help. Not because they expected him to, but because they trusted him. Keanu didn't just write a check. He showed up at the car wash wearing an old t-shirt and rubber gloves, scrubbing windshields alongside them. People drove from 3 neighborhoods over just to get their cars cleaned by that guy from the movies, but he never made it about himself. He laughed when soap got in his eyes. He joked with customers. He handed out bottled water like he'd done it 1,000 times before. The fundraiser raised more than enough to cover the shortfall for the year. But more than money, it proved something deeper. The center wasn't just a building anymore. It was theirs, and they were willing to fight for it. Around the same time, a local high school teacher reached out to the center with an idea. She'd noticed that students who volunteered there had better attendance, fewer disciplinary issues, and more confidence. What if the center became an official credit-bearing internship? The school board said yes. Now teens could earn school credit for helping run programs, manage events, or even assist with maintenance. It wasn't just a hangout, it was a stepping stone. Keanu heard about it during one of his quiet visits. He stood in the hallway, listening as a group of students presented their community leadership project to a small panel of teachers. One of them, the one who'd once filmed the pool video, spoke clearly, calmly, about accountability and second chances. "Mistakes don't define you," he said. "What you do after them does." Keanu didn't say anything. He just leaned against the wall, arms crossed, and smiled to himself. That was worth more than any movie premiere. Back at his house, life had settled into a rhythm that felt richer than before. His backyard remained peaceful, but it no longer felt like a fortress. Sometimes on summer evenings, he'd hear distant music from the center, soft, muffled, full of life. And instead of annoyance, he felt a quiet pride. The noise wasn't an invasion anymore. It was proof that something good was growing. He never locked his gate. Not because he forgot, but because he didn't need to. Respect once earned didn't require locks. One afternoon, while walking his dog, he passed a group of younger kids, maybe 12 or 13, standing at the edge of his property, pointing at the pool. For a split second, his stomach tightened. But then one of the older teens from the center came jogging up the street, saw them, and gently steered them away. "Hey," he said, not harshly, "and that's someone's home. But if you want to swim, come down to Oak Street. We've got room." The kids followed him without argument. Keanu kept walking, heart lighter than it had been in years. Months later, the center applied for a small grant to build a covered outdoor classroom, somewhere kids could gather even when it rained. The application asked for a letter of community support. Keanu wrote one, not as a famous actor, but as a neighbor. He talked about safety, belonging, and the power of giving young people real responsibility. The grant was approved. At the groundbreaking ceremony, he stood in the back, hands in his pockets, watching as the original group of teens, now a little taller, a little sure of themselves, turned the first shovels of dirt. No speeches, no cameras, just work and hope and the kind of quiet joy that doesn't need an audience. That night he sat by his pool again, the water reflecting the moon like it always had. But now when he looked out at the hills, he didn't just see his own piece. He saw a ripple, a small one maybe, but real, spreading outward through a neighborhood that had learned, slowly and imperfectly, how to care for each other. He never told this part of the story. There was no need. The proof was in the laughter drifting from Oak Street in the clean courtyard, in the way strangers now nodded to each other on the street like they shared a secret worth keeping. And sometimes, late at night when the city was quiet and the stars were bright, he'd think about how the whole thing started with a broken tile, a viral video, and a choice, to respond with anger or with heart. He'd chosen heart, and somehow, against all odds, it had been enough. More than enough. Because the real victory wasn't that the trespassing stopped. It was that the trespassers became builders. And in a world that often feels divided, that kind of change, slow, human, and rooted in dignity, was the rarest kind of magic. Keanu took a slow sip of tea, listened to the crickets, and smiled. The story wasn't over, but it was good. And for now, that was all that mattered.